I would like to see B2B marketers allocate a lot more of their budget to these top of funnel brand building activities as opposed to what everyone spends their money on today, which is bottom funnel, direct response, performance marketing.
Hello, and welcome to The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Hingle. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-host, Angela Voss, our CEO, and we're here with a special guest, Peter Weinberg. You probably know Peter as one half of the B2B marketing guys, along with John Lombardo. Peter spent 10 years at LinkedIn studying, publishing, and evangelizing marketing effectiveness research as the head of development for the B2B Institute. He and John announced a couple of months ago that they were leaving LinkedIn to start their own company, and I know Ange and I are eager to learn more today about what they will be up to next. We're so excited to have a fellow B2B marketing nerd on the show. Welcome, Peter.
Delighted to be here. B2B marketing nerds of the world unite.
Absolutely. It's the best topic.
It is.
We're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. We have a B2B marketing effectiveness ninja with us today, so our topic won't be a huge surprise. We're discussing B2B marketing hard truths. What contrarian principles drive growth for B2B brands? Why is B2B still resistant to the marketing effectiveness principles adopted by B2C? And what can B2B marketers do to ensure they are investing their marketing dollars wisely? Now, before we get into our interviews, I like to tee things up with an article, but for this interview in particular, I had an incredibly hard time finding just one story to open with, since Peter has so much work to choose from, and B2B marketing news in general tends to be more focused on MarTech and tactics than marketing effectiveness. So I'll just open with a quote directly from Peter's LinkedIn when he announced he was departing LinkedIn. I'm grateful for the experts who schooled us in the dark arts of marketing effectiveness, like Bennett and Field and Professors Sharp, Romanuk, and Ritson. I'm grateful for the many marketers who adopted our contrarian ideas and showed us what great brand building looks like. And most of all, I'm grateful for my coworkers. Without their support, we could never have started the B2B Institute. Now, we'll get into some nitty-gritty, tough B2B marketing questions, but first, I want to rewind the clock a little bit to 10 years ago when Peter first started at LinkedIn. So, can you tell us, why did you join LinkedIn, and what sparked yours and LinkedIn's interest in B2B marketing effectiveness enough to create what's now known today as the B2B Institute?
It's a great question. 10 years ago, so young, so innocent. I'd have to travel back in time. Yeah, I think to the degree there's a through line between probably everything we'll talk about, it's this idea of contrarian ideas. And from a very young age, I was drawn to contrarian concepts. I pride myself on being open-minded. I always loved the idea that take whatever you really believe to be true and just consider what if the exact opposite is true, right? It's an interesting way to go through life. So I think at the time, 10 years ago, everybody wanted to work at Google and Facebook and Twitter. And, I got a job offer from LinkedIn. I was like, well, LinkedIn's very interesting. It's very differentiated from those other three big social media companies everyone wanted to work at. More professional focus versus personal focus, more B2B versus B2C. So I saw it as a unique opportunity. I knew people who worked there, said it was a wonderful place. And luckily for me, I took that job, probably the best career decision I ever made. And here we are 10 years later.
Absolutely. It seems like such an amazing ride and so much impact. Elena and I know a lot of others, it took us a while to catch on to the work that you guys are doing. And as she had shared, we're just huge fans of all that you and John have done and others in the space, right? Like Elena mentioned, Les Bennett, Peter Field, and a lot of others. And when we think about the concepts that have resonated and have really helped the marketing world, from balancing brand and activation to really this idea that we need to continually expand our customer base. We're not as loyal on the B2B or on the B2C side. As marketers, we would all love people to be expanding mental availability, harnessing the power of emotion. Like, do you have a favorite piece of research or topic that you guys have really evangelized throughout the marketing world?
To me, what ended up being the kind of keystone concept or cornerstone concept that tied everything together was the 95-5 rule. Ultimately, where we made the greatest contribution. The 95-5 rule kind of tells you how you need to think about strategy, creative, distribution, and measurement. The basic concept there is that at any given time, the vast majority of customers are not in market to buy. So idea from Professor John Dawes of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. Basically says at any given time, something like 5% of buyers are in market, 95% are not in market. They're future buyers who won't need to buy the category for months, years, maybe even decades. And I think the whole orientation of the marketing industry, and certainly in B2B, is towards that 5%. And this idea that, like, yeah, it's not that that's unimportant. It's just that it's a very, very small opportunity. The biggest opportunity is to influence future customers who are the source of future cash flows, which is how companies are ultimately valued. So to me, all of the research kind of like revolves around that central concept, because then you start to say, okay, well, how do I influence people who aren't going to buy from years from now? It's obviously not this direct response, buy now, buy now, buy now type creative. It's more of the emotional storytelling. How do you target future buyers? It's not by hyper targeting the CEO today, because the people who are going to be the CEO 5 or 10 years from now are in a different role, right? So it's a broader targeting. And then, of course, when it comes to measurement, it's having a more long-term orientation, right? How are we changing mental availability to impact those future sales versus like how many clicks or leads did we get right now? So to me, that's like the central concept that all the other concepts revolve around.
It's a great framework in totality for how we need to think about B2B. And I think even in some B2C cases, we work with both B2B and B2C brands in television and CTV. But that idea, right, that the big game is the 95, and the growth of the digital world, of course, and the love for data from a marketing perspective draws us all into, well, what's happening today and who are we converting that might be in market. But what I love about it too is like, it's sort of given permission for the B2B world to be more creative. For whatever reason, we've all kind of fallen into this like tactical, we need to make sure that people understand what we do. And maybe it's better to be messaging with a monster for your brand or, using characters like Astro. So it's so great. And I'm sure you two get a lot of feedback from B2B marketers across the world. I think we all have names in our head in terms of folks out there that study marketing effectiveness that are maybe a little spicy. And what findings do you guys find are most controversial? What solicits the strongest reaction from your audience?
I mean, we are drawn to contrarian ideas. Everything we ever published was somewhat contrarian. If it wasn't, we didn't bother publishing it because it's just not useful to tell people things they already know, right? If everybody knows it, there's no competitive advantage to you knowing it. So I'd say they were all somewhat spicy, but I think the spiciest one from my first day to my final day to today is the idea of broad targeting in B2B. I mean, we have it beaten in our heads the moment you enter the industry, even in like school, if you study marketing, that it is much smarter to know exactly, precisely who you need to go after. And to say like, well, we're going to broadly target anyone who could buy from us now or in the future, it just sounds wrong to people. You'll sound smarter going in a room saying, oh no, we're targeting the CMO at big tech companies with 10,000 employees in Minneapolis than you will going in the room saying, we're going to target marketers, right? But nevertheless, like the research, I would say, is pretty overwhelming that you get better financial performance broadly targeting, in that case, anyone in the marketing industry than hyper targeting that quote unquote ICP. So I think people have a lot of trouble with that. It sounds less strategic or intelligent, like just because we're told extreme focus better than kind of, I'm not sure exactly who's going to buy for me. And it's, contrary to the narrative pushed out by ad tech and martech about the importance of data, hyper targeting this population versus that population. Small brands are like, I have a very small budget. Surely it's more efficient for me to go after this tiny segment than try to go after everyone. So there's a lot of resistance to that idea.
Absolutely. It's the idea, right, that it's wasteful to not have that niche targeting. We try to lean into the language on positive spill. We initially have worked in the linear space only. Just recently, of course, with the growth of CTV, we're working there too. But we have the benefit, I guess, on this topic of you can only be so targeted in the linear world. And then if we're talking about a screen on the wall, there was also the variable of, well, who's in the room?
This is where digital marketing, quote unquote, like really set back the marketing profession, because as you said, like prior to 1991 or whatever, you could only target broadly. Then with the internet and quote unquote big data, it was all of a sudden you had the ability to hyper target specific audiences, and people assumed that that was an improvement, but it wasn't. I love your, what do you call it? Positive spill.
Positive spill.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great concept, or the idea that the waste is the part that works. And it's that there's a lot of uncertainty in life. The idea that you know exactly who's going to buy from you. I think marketers are grossly overconfident in their ability to predict who's going to buy. I liken it to index investing versus trying to buy a particular stock, right? Again, you'll sound more intelligent if you're like, oh no, I'm positive it's Walmart, this stock, I'm putting all my money in that stock, I know it's going to go up. Than if you say, you know what, I'm not exactly sure what stock's going to go up, so I'm just going to broadly buy the S&P 500 and wait a long time to see results. But if you look at the data, I'd say it's quite conclusive that passive index investors beat people who try to pick very particular stocks. So it's kind of like that. Marketers are trying to pick particular audiences, like people try to pick particular stocks, and it's not a good strategy in finance or in marketing, I would say.
I think we've found too that even if, say, you got lucky and you knew exactly who was going to buy for you, a lot of times the data that's used for targeting online isn't accurate either. So you're not even hitting exactly who you thought you were going to
Yes.
hit. But Peter, I'm excited you said targeting. I was interested in your answer to that question because we have similar targeting beliefs. And the first time I posted about targeting on LinkedIn, I was so surprised by the vitriol that I received about broad targeting. I'm like, what in the world? What can of worms did I just open? So you're right. One question we wanted to ask is, I know that you've probably seen an enormous amount of B2B marketing and B2B ads in all of the research that you've done. So you've been subjected to a lot of different types of advertising, and B2B can sometimes be a little bit boring. So if you had a magic wand and you could change just one thing about B2B marketing, what would it be?
At a high level, I would like to see B2B marketers allocate a lot more of their budget to these top of funnel brand building activities as opposed to what everyone spends their money on today, which is bottom funnel, direct response, performance marketing. I think the question is, how does that happen? So then it's like, you got your magic wand. What do you need to change to make that happen? Because the truth is, increasingly, B2B marketers know they need to do that or want to do that, but they can't because they've got these internal stakeholders like finance or sales who have a lot of influence in B2B. One of the big differences between B2B and B2C, this kind of massive influence of the sales department in particular. So I think really to me, it's actually, how can we get brand marketers to start framing what they do in a more financial way? That's where I think we have not done ourselves any favors by the way we've talked about brand over the past 10 years. Especially with the brand purpose movement and the brand love people who have just kind of made brand really sound like this very wishy-washy, like arts and crafts type activity. You know, I always joke it's like you need an MBA from Hogwarts to know what most of these brand marketers are talking about. So, you know, for my magic wand, I'd try to get brand marketers to frame what they do in more financial terms. You know, we're not trying to build brand love. We're trying to increase future cash flows by ensuring buyers think of us when they enter the market. That's very different from we want brand love or we're saving the earth with our brand purpose. It's ultimately about investing more in brand, but I think how you get there is by having a investor's mentality. Call it an investment for a reason. I think that's probably what I would do, in addition to maybe getting myself a house in Ravello or Capri or something. But you know, I guess you're very specific about what the magic wand was able to do. So sure, that's what
Yes. I was going to ask you a question about marketing effectiveness, but Ange, I think you should ask Peter about TV because you just teed up that question so perfectly.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you think B2B brands need to be allocating a larger percent just to top of funnel in general. And a lot of the research that you've put out, as well as others, does tend to favor TV as a channel. And we are a TV agency. So, of course, we have to ask, how do you feel about B2B brands utilizing TV as a way to grow? Or how can we get more brands leaning into it? I know from our perspective, we have to motivate and influence B2B brands to come into television. And sometimes they're like, do you know what we do? I mean, do you know who we need to target?
I think TV can make sense for B2B. I don't like by default say broad targeting means it's got to be TV. When you think about media effectiveness and what you need in a media or medium, you kind of really need two things. You need on target reach. So if you're trying to reach IT decision makers, you need a platform that can actually reach IT decision makers. And if you want to talk about it in pure dollars and cents, you need the lowest cost per reach you can possibly get. So you want to reach as many people as possible. So if you can reach IT decision makers for a cent versus $1, that's better. I think the other thing, though, you need to take into account, it's not purely an efficiency game, the kind of effectiveness side of the equation is attention, right? So it's not just that you want to reach the IT decision maker for a cent, it's that you want to capture some attention from that audience. You want more than a second. I mean, it kind of depends on if you're trying to create a new memory of the brand, which the research suggests you need a certain threshold, like let's say 10 seconds of attention, versus refreshing of existing memory of the brand, which you could do in like sub 1 second potentially. So in other words, you need to balance on target reach with quality attention. I think there's no denying that like television is probably the greatest medium that's ever been built as it relates to attention. Obviously, people in digital marketing don't like to hear this. It's very fashionable to kind of like poo-poo television as this like old-fashioned concept, but there's a reason almost every famous brand you've ever heard of was built on television because it has enormous attention. It's a big screen, it's a somewhat captive audience, it's sight, sound, motion. It's an incredible advertising medium. So then the question is just on target reach. You can get your attention potentially on television, but in B2B, broad targeting doesn't mean you need to reach everyone, right? I used to work on the Colgate Palmolive account, and my client, Mindell, she was always like, we need to reach people with teeth. So for Colgate, obviously television, great investment. Salesforce doesn't need to reach anyone with teeth. They need to reach people who buy CRM. So it's a smaller aperture. But depending on the business, I mean, let's stick with Salesforce. Salesforce has to reach everyone who buys CRM, but actually they have a much broader offering outside of CRM. They have an investor community, they have the analyst community, they have potential employees. So you start expanding out and the audience does get fairly broad. And I think there are certain circumstances, Angela, where like it gets broad enough that it has the right combination of reach/targeting and attention for it to make sense. But I don't think it's necessarily universal. I was talking to a client who sells subterranean inertial navigation systems, and they're trying to target people who operate mines in Australia. And like, I think TV would actually probably be too broad for them. So it starts by just defining what is the broadest interpretation of who could buy your products now or in the future? What is the most cost-efficient way to reach them with high-quality attention? Sometimes that's television. Sometimes it's LinkedIn. Sometimes when I left LinkedIn, they're starting to push into the connected TV space, which I think is like, that's an enormous opportunity. If you can have the targeting of somewhere like LinkedIn with the reach and attention of something like television, that I think is potentially like the future of B2B and how you really build brands.
I think it makes a ton of sense. For us, it's all about understanding that percentage of the total population, right? And we have thresholds to guide us whether or not TV might make sense for a brand or not. Another quote that we like to say within the agency is everything works at zero. So I think that's where you're talking about efficient reach. And TV gets a bad rap on the topic of cost.
Well, speaking of reach and attention, Peter, you've covered several marketing effectiveness principles already today, and we're big fans of effectiveness, and we appreciate how you've helped push it forward in B2B through your research. I wanted to ask, how do you feel about the current state of effectiveness in the US, and would you agree with some of those harsher critiques from academics like Mark Ritson?
Yeah, well, love Ritson, a mentor and a friend of mine. In general, listen, I'm a proud American. I don't like to play into any like anti-American sentiment, especially coming from other regions of the world. But on the one hand, I think it's very hard to argue that Americans are not good at building brands. I mean, if we just review some of our greatest hits over the past 100 years, there's Coca-Cola. I think that was a relatively successful brand. Apple, I think, has been a relatively successful brand. Disney, Microsoft, OpenAI. I mean, we could spend an hour going over iconic world-eating American brands. So obviously we have that capability. That said, yeah, I think it's fair to say that Americans are not on the tip of the spear of this marketing effectiveness revolution. I mean, there is a real revolution happening and gathering steam. And it's the work of Les Binet and Peter Field and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. I mean, you can just take those two right here. Neither of them are in America, right? Binet and Field are British, wonderful British gentlemen, talking to Les yesterday. Ehrenberg Bass is in Adelaide, Australia. Ritson is in Australia. He's in Tasmania. So the actual ground zero for the marketing effectiveness revolution is not the United States. We're here with the Seth Godin, Simon Sinek brand purpose type thought leaders, which is actually the opposite of the marketing effectiveness revolution. Marketing effectiveness revolution is about empirical best practices. So you look at the data, you see what works, what replicates, that's what works. In America, we like this kind of marketing by anecdote, where we just tell these very catchy stories about why we think Apple is a big brand. Oh, it's because they start with Y. That's why they're a big brand. And then we all kind of go down that path. So I think it's fair to say the marketing effectiveness revolution did not come out of America, which is sad because you could argue Americans invented advertising, and certainly we were the ground zero for it in the past. And then, yeah, I can't deny that every year I'd go to these big conferences in America, and I'd always start by saying, raise your hand if you've read How Brands Grow or heard of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And it's crickets. I could be in a room of 200 CMOs and you'd see one hand go up. That said, Elena, it's gotten much better. This is where I'm an optimist, perhaps like many Americans. We're known for being optimistic people. And every year, more and more people in this country are aware of these principles and adopting those principles. And frankly, some of the biggest places to originally adopt it were Procter & Gamble, which is an American firm, right? Diageo, these are real marketing effectiveness stalwarts, right? So I think it is a fair critique. I think we have not played as central a role as maybe we would have liked in the marketing effectiveness revolution. I think the awareness of the principles is, in my experience, actually lower here than if you were to ask a room full of CMOs in the UK or even Australia, have you heard of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute? You see a lot more hands go up, but it's changing. I think we have the history and the heritage of building strong brands. I think the revolution is gaining steam here, and I think the best days are ahead of the American marketing industry.
I like the optimist point of view, but I think you're undeniably right that there's not as much awareness of marketing effectiveness. And we think about thought leaders, there's not as many, but you are one that I think of when I think about the US and who's kind of leading the charge in marketing effectiveness. I think of you as a public figure, really, in marketing. And that means you've had a lot of support, but you've also probably received criticism too, as it tends to go when you post contrarian opinions on the internet. So what has been the hardest part for you about becoming a well-known marketing thought leader online?
It has not been an enormous burden or anything. It's been a great privilege. It's been very fun. I don't have much bad things to say about the experience, but I guess the hard part is just bias. Whenever you say anything about marketing, if someone disagrees with you, the first thing they're going to say is, well, you work there, so you would say that. That was always a challenge for me at LinkedIn. If I said LinkedIn's a great platform, they'd say, oh, you're saying that because you work at LinkedIn. I'd be like, no, I work at LinkedIn because I believe that, right? So there's the challenge of bias. It was always very confusing to me because I'd say, oh, broad targeting. And then some people would say well, of course you're saying that because, LinkedIn wants to monetize more of its inventory. And then you'd get the other side of people saying well, actually, that's very bad for LinkedIn because people will start moving to television. So no matter what, everyone's very hyper-vigilant around your bias, trying to call out your bias when it's convenient to them versus, let's say, picking apart the actual meat of the argument. But I wouldn't say it's been enormously difficult. I also think it's a reasonable point. People do have bias. You should examine people's bias. You should be very skeptical whenever anyone's saying anything. You could argue marketers have not been skeptical enough over the past 20 years of some of the things they've heard from people with maybe ulterior motives. So to the degree anything's been hard or unpleasant about it, it's been that people implying that we're saying things because of some commercial obligation and not because we actually believe it to be true. And we pride ourselves on saying things because they're true, even if they are commercially inconvenient in some cases.
We definitely experience a bit of that too because we're a TV agency and TV happens to be loved by marketing effectiveness typically, but you're right. We are biased, to be fair. We love TV probably a little bit too much. But speaking of being associated with LinkedIn, you're now moving on to start your own venture. And we'd love to keep talking to you for hours about B2B marketing, but I know you're very busy because you're now a founder. So what can you tell us? I know you're still in stealth mode, but is there anything you can share about this new company that you've started with John?
Yeah, I'm living that startup lifestyle, living the entrepreneurial dream here in Brooklyn. We left LinkedIn about 3 months ago. Again, super grateful to LinkedIn for all the incredible opportunities we were given. We are in stealth mode, so I can't say much. All I can say is we are hard at work in our secret underground laboratory. I believe we have discovered something that will kind of turn the tide in the war on brand and help people make better financial cases for brand investment. And we're hoping to come out of stealth on May 1st, ideally, and kind of show the world what we've been building. But obviously, as a marketer, it absolutely pains me to not be able to shamelessly self-promote our brand and our product. But I have to exercise a tiny bit of self-restraint just so we don't scoop ourselves as we get ready for prime time in May. But it's going to be great. You're going to love it. Look forward to coming back telling you all about it once we are ready.
I'm sure that whatever you do, it's going to be exciting. I can tell you that Angela and I, as soon as we saw your LinkedIn posts, we were sharing them around and we're just big fans of you and John and the work you've done. And we are not the only ones. So I'm sure whatever you do, it's going to have a lot of support. And hopefully this podcast gets people a little bit more excited. You're building a lot of hype. So when the day comes, everyone's going to be ready to hear about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the support. Appreciate the sharing. Appreciate the opportunity to come speak with both of you.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us and nerding out on some B2B marketing. It was a pleasure to have you. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Ayana Klaphaki for producing the show and Taylor De Los Reyes for editing. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find the show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to hear more from us, subscribe to our weekly email newsletter. It's built for marketers seeking research-first analysis of the latest trends. You can go to marketingarchitects.com/newsletter to subscribe. Now go forth and build great marketing.